It's Black History Month, a time set aside to pay tribute to the oppression and progress of the Black community throughout history. As a show about policy and political movements, there are so many figures and moments in history we remember and appreciate. But today, we want to focus on what's being done next, what new adversities or recurring ones will lead to new progress, plus leaders working to envision and make real a more equitable Connecticut. Good morning, and thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Emma Woolforce. Joining me right now is State Senator Heron Gaston, Democrat from Bridgeport. Thanks so much for being here.
I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. So, kicking off, obviously we said we're talking about Black History Month, and we know you're very busy right now with your first legislative session here in Connecticut. You were voted into your Senate seat this past election, representing a city with a large minority population in the state. What does it mean to you to be a part of the progress toward representation in our state legislature?
I think it's crucially important to have representation that reflects the universality and diversity of the community to which individuals come from. And as I look at Bridgeport, I don't see Bridgeport as a melting pot, but a salad bowl. And each of us have our special ingredients by which we're able to contribute to that. And I also represent the town of Stratford as well, that also has a very diverse racial makeup as well as composition of the community.
Absolutely. As I said, again, we're kicking off Black History Month here. You actually worked with the late John Lewis, a powerful civil rights advocate. Do you think it's important while you work and look forward to also keep history and the past in mind?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things I like to say to people is that if you don't know your history, you don't know your past. If you don't know your past, you don't know your present. If you don't know your present, you don't know your future. I think it's critically important to think about where we've been and how far we've come and where we still need to go as a society. And we've made a lot of progress, but we've also see that the moral arc of the universe is long. And as Dr. King once said, but it bends towards justice. And every now and then we see that the pendulum swings in the right direction, and then sometimes that pendulum swings in the wrong direction. But for those of us who want to continue to center those conversations that help to make our country much more inclusive, it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we're continuing to swing that pendulum forward.
Right. And swinging that pendulum with work, you're co-chair of the Public Safety Committee. We know there have been renewed demands for more police accountability after the death of Tyree Nichols, but this isn't new, and Connecticut has passed some legislation before. Right now, you are sponsoring a new bill to increase not only accountability, but trust between communities and officers. Can you tell me a little bit more about that proposal?
Yes, so my colleague Fred G. and I are working on this initiative that kind of comes out of the Alvin Penn racial profiling bill. And so I introduced Senate Bill 223 that would require law enforcement officials across the state of Connecticut who come in contact with motorists for a routine traffic stop would have to notify and the reason why the motorist is being pulled over. It's a basic courtesy issue. I think it cuts across communities. I think that we have a generation of people now that, we have taught as a society to ask questions of institutions, of people, and I just think it's the right thing to do to help foster positive interaction from the very onset of that stop for that law enforcement official and the motorist.
And would there be any funding related to that bill? What could community policing efforts look like in our state?
Absolutely. So I think that, on top of this bill, built into that, I would also like to see implicit bias training of law enforcement officials going into the profession, as well as de-escalation training. I would like to see more police departments and municipalities and towns that have law enforcement departments to engage with the community as well about policing, and maybe they could do classes like citizens review classes, or giving the opportunity to lay people to come in and to see the intricacies of how the police department actually work. I know that when I was at Yale University as an administrator, I know that the Yale Police Department actually provided a citizens police academy that allowed the public to come in and to see and to build relationships between law enforcement and the broader community. So I would like to see that happen across our 169 towns and cities.
Interesting. And have you seen any bipartisan support for this bill yet? What's sort of the status of your Senate bill right now?
Absolutely. We want this to be broad-based. We're working across the aisle with our Republican colleagues as well on this, and I do believe that we are finding some synergy. There are a lot of folks who are in law enforcement who serve on the Public Safety Committee, and so far we've gotten very good feedback in terms of their leaning towards this bill and putting some real teeth in our legislation around this issue.
Oh, well, speaking of those Republican colleagues, some on your committee have proposed a bill to ensure police without body cameras on, whether it be off duty or in another situation, are still able to confront crime and protect the public. Any reaction to that bill? What's your feeling for that?
Yeah, so I certainly do think that if law enforcement officials are in our community and they have a responsibility and a duty to act when they see something going on and occurring, I do believe that they should be able to use their police powers to protect and serve those communities and those constituents that might be in distress. But I do believe that those cameras should be on at all times for accountability purposes, because at the end of the day, the police are accountable to the constituents and the residents across our state. They're paid with our tax dollars, and so therefore our taxpayers deserve the right to have transparency and to know what's going on with their tax dollars. And as a part of that, accountability is making sure that those cameras are kept on.
As you just said, I think body cameras have been a big part of this accountability conversation. We've seen those videos come into play with the Tyree Nichols incident, before that George Floyd, and even in our own state in West Haven, Connecticut just made statewide standards for body cameras on officers. You touched on it a little bit, but in your opinion, what are impacts, if any, of potentially losing those body cam standards?
I think that we're going to continue to put some real teeth into ensuring that we are accountable to the public. This is something that the public is calling for, not just here in the state of Connecticut, but all across our country. And we're beginning to see that a lot of police departments want to respond positively to the public around this issue because we want the public as well to grow alongside our law enforcement officials, and we want this to be a hand-in-glove effort, that we're not operating in silos, but that we are working in tandem with the community and their sensitivities and needs, as well as being accountable as law enforcement officials in their capacity.
Absolutely. Some state legislators have said, though, they feel or they've heard from law enforcement that sometimes these cameras may hinder them, or they feel like they can't fully perform their job. Have you heard that at all from anyone, whether in your own party or across the aisle?
I actually have heard that. And, at the end of the day, I think that if you are doing what you're supposed to do and you're acting professionally and you are engaging with the public from an empathetic and compassionate perspective, and you're being professional at all times, it should not matter whether or not you're being watched or not. One of the mantras that I live by is, whatever I do or say, it should be able to, be on the screen across 95. So, you should always be doing the right thing. And I think the cameras really help us to stay accountable, not only to the public, but to ourselves as well.
So last question here. You're an elected official, but you're also a pastor in Bridgeport. Can you talk a little bit about any impacts you've seen from violence like these incidents on your community?
Yes, I mean, all too often, I've experienced even the ease with which, young people who look like me fall under the crushing yoke of injustice by our criminal justice system more broadly, but then also having disproportionate contact with law enforcement because of the over-policing and over-police presence in our communities. And so growing up, I saw a plethora of police officers on a daily basis patrolling the streets, and we have a lot of great law enforcement officers who really want to do the right thing. But I've also encountered many bad apples, and I think that when it comes to the legal profession or law enforcement, we cannot afford to have bad apples, and where there are bad apples, we have to be able to weed those folks out. To ensure that they're not given a bad reputation for every other person who's doing the right thing and who wants to go in law enforcement and make a difference in our communities. And so, with my own personal experience, I know all too well the importance of making sure that police are accountable to the community, and that the community feels that they could trust the police, and that they can have a conversation with the police and not see the police as being against them, but seeing the police as a partner with them, helping to solve the issues of the community.
And that trust in your own way, how are you looking ahead, building trust with your constituents up here at the state capitol?
I'm building trust by letting my constituents know the bills that I'm raising, that I heard them while I was on the campaign trail, that I'm putting together pieces of legislation that will speak to what those concerns and needs are, and then helping to address the quality of life and day-to-day issues that matter most to them. And police accountability is something that I've heard pretty much at every door that I've talked to, door that I've stopped at. People have had this as a concern, and so this is one of the reasons that this piece of legislation is paramount that we pass it this legislative session.
Definitely a conversation we'll continue having this session. Well, thank you again so much, Senator, for being with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, coming up on The Real Story, Black History, one of protest, political movement, and community organizing. And that's still how many things get done today. We'll speak with one advocate giving power to the people, demanding change in Connecticut. She joins us today to talk about some of those changes she believes are overdue. Stick with us for this special episode of The Real Story.